I'm delighted to welcome such a large audience in the beautiful setting of Vienna University. The impressive turnout shows best how important the topic is. It is a great honor for us to welcome today the European Union Commissioner for International Cooperation, Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Response, Commissioner Kristalina Georgieva. Heartily welcome.
We are now going to 2015, a very critical year, Millennium Development Goals, what we are going to do in the world after. Well, I for one believe that nothing short of eradicating poverty and hunger is a goal worth pursuing within a generation. But I also know that we can only achieve this goal if all people, men and women, are able to contribute. And for that, achieving gender equality is absolutely paramount for success in a world that would be a better place for our children. Thank you.
I come from a country not many years ago that made violence a norm. When you look at apartheid, what it did to the majority of citizens in that country, it used violence as a weapon to oppress, to subjugate its majority citizens. So there is a context, there is an explanation of why should we work with men in the world, and in South Africa in particular, because if we don't, we're losing the people who are perpetrators, the people who are raised in a particular manner. And this is what I want to talk about. You see, colleagues, this morning, unless all of us, and I'm excited that we have men in this room, unless all of us as men in this room, and I'm saying throughout the world, unless we begin to challenge patriarchy, unless we begin to challenge the privilege of our maleness. You see, the oppression of women, it's not accidental. It has its genesis, it has its roots as to how, and I want to emphasize, how all of us in this room were raised.
I think, sadly, that the evidence is that despite much money and many resources, we still have a long way to go in the humanitarian sector. So why is this the case? I think partly the answer is that actually we don't know how well we are doing, because the reality is that sex and age disaggregated data is, although it's increasingly being collected by agencies, we still haven't taken the necessary next step, which is to use it to really inform our program decisions and for that information to lead to appropriate action.
The second issue, which for us is something new by its magnitude, is the fact that we see more and more in conflict that there is not only a targeting of health workers, but there is a systematization of the targeting, part of a strategy. So if you want to put pressure, if you want to terrorize the other or your population, you start to put pressure on doctors, hospital, you arrest them immediately. And we've seen that in several contexts over time. We knew that, but the systematization is a surprise for us. And we need to grasp it. And clearly, we have this impression in contexts like Syria, but we can look at Bahrain and other places where clearly, from day one, it could be from the government, could be from non-state armed group, that there is a clear will to target and they know exactly what they're doing.
The one thing that within a healthcare system I particularly find challenging and engaging with the healthcare system which responds in conflict situations is where does gender-based violence, responding to issues of gender-based violence, responding to sexual reproductive health concerns within the context where your basic services are not being met. So where you're looking at psychosocial support services, where you're looking at services for clinical care for survivors, especially in context of conflict, we have enough evidence over the last few years that GBV increasingly is being used as a tool of war.
Yeah, I think women are more vulnerable, especially when they are alone without any support, and special consideration should be given to them as a, because they can't also find their way easily in a foreign country or in a difficult situation. Men also are, need some support. However, I think they can manage better the difficult situation.
Inside the refugee population, you have women have definitely special needs in terms of, and again, talking about medical needs, it's more on reproductive health. Make sure that their pregnancies are followed up before and after the delivery. It's making sure that they would have access to confidential areas if there is anything connected to sexual, gender-based violence and so on. So they have needs, but broadly speaking, refugees are a population that is by definition extremely vulnerable.
As a journalist working for ORF Current Affairs, a green light to go to countries like these is not easy to get. TV shooting is an expensive business, and we all live in times of crisis and austerity. Furthermore, the Global South is not a big success in terms of market shares. For me, there are three possibilities to be sent to Sub-Saharan Africa, and I know from my colleagues in print that things are not that different there. So first is Austria has a special interest. Second is there is an invitation from an NGO, and only third place come independent trips. It should be in our own interest to report how taxpayers' money is spent, but what kind of newspaper or TV channel would spend a lot of money to send somebody to a remote place in, let's say, Ethiopia to investigate what ADA, Austrian Development Agency, is doing there?
Do some of the following things to try to put the Congo into the media. 1. Do some research and come up with a report, say on mining in Congo and how children are being exploited. Secondly, we could fly in a Hollywood star to highlight the issue. Viewers might not connect to the issue itself, but they are connected to the star. Let's fly in Angelina Jolie or an Austrian celebrity like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I mean, there are some areas where you can sense there is real change in terms of how people perceive disability and how they deal, and they are supporting disability in terms of provision of access and entitlement. But especially in rural areas, in the Palestinian camps, in communities where they are not fortunate to be even accessing basic rights themselves, the rights of persons with disabilities are much more marginalized, and they are in a much more chronic situations. So I wouldn't even address equally the situation of people with disabilities back home, as it is same treatment, same entitlement.
Working as a person who is in the humanitarian sector and then in a country like Pakistan, I think it is very important to bring forth to the world that what kind of problems and what kind of challenges women in the humanitarian sector face in Pakistan, to be more specific. There's an understanding that, yes, maybe the people of Pakistan are not very open towards women, which is true, but I wanted to come to this particular occasion to highlight that how women working in the humanitarian sector face problems much more than any other working woman would face over there due to certain reasons. There are a lot of reasons which I'm going to talk about when I start with my panel.
I wanted to give you some compelling rationales for why tackle sexual and reproductive health in emergencies. The words sex, sexuality, conception, and pregnancy should be concepts connected to joy, consensual pleasure, intimacy, and even celebration. But since we're talking about doing work in acute emergencies in a way where gender matters, we need to look first at the burden of poor and good sexual and reproductive health that falls on women's shoulders. Let's face it, during a crisis, people are having sex. Women still get pregnant, women still give birth.
I definitely think that reproductive health need to be on the front line in emergency crisis, and but for that we had to prove it. And one of the interesting things is to see regarding the data that we collect and the interpretation that we do, we were able to show that sometimes in the two first patients that will arrive in the surgical room, one of them will be for C-section. So I think it's the women themselves who are the best advocacy person to say that we need to focus on that.